It's budget for Bharat as the election season kicks in, unveiling his last full-fledged budget under the Modi government. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley announced massive hikes in outlays for the rural sector, including a universal healthcare plan for the needy. Finance Minister says under this, nearly 50 crore poor people will get hospitalization benefits of up to 5 lakh rupees without providing for this massive expense. Public infrastructure gets top billing too, as the total outlay has been hiked to almost 6 lakh crore rupees. For those who are wondering where the money will come from, there are small giveaways on the fiscal front, with the fiscal deficit target tweaked to 3.5% for FY18 and 3.3% for the next fiscal.
Indeed. Now, it looks like the government has taken the middle class for granted, though, as there is precious little for them, except for a 40,000 rupees standard deduction. From the market's point of view, investors' worst fears indeed did come true earlier today, with the long-term capital gains tax making a comeback. All investors with capital gains of 1 lakh rupees and above will have to pay 10% tax. What's more, there is no change in the securities transaction tax and the short-term capital gains tax, which stays at 15% there. There is something to cheer for India Inc., as smaller companies with a turnover of up to 250 crore rupees will now be taxed at just 25% instead of the 30% earlier. The top guns of Indian industry will still have to wait for the finance minister to await his promise.
Well, it may or may not be a dream budget, but I can tell you we've got a dream panel debating the budget right here on ET Now on the budget debate. It's a pleasure to welcome Jayant Sinha, Minister of Civil Aviation, Shashi Tharoor, MP and former Union Minister, Yogendra Yadav, founder, National President, Swaraj India Political Party, and Swaminathan Iyer, consulting editor of ET Now. Before I take it to this dream panel, let's get a quick word in from Swami. Swami, what's your verdict? An election budget that tries hard to not be populist.
No, I would say it's not an election. In fact, I would say that of all the election budgets I have seen, this is the least populist, and that is a plus point. It also has a genuine aim to have some kind of labor flexibility to increase employment, a plus point. Two major negative points. One is fiscal slippage to the point where, frankly, you're not taking fisc seriously at all. And the second, I'm afraid, is a return to import substitution as a way of improving production. Make in India has become protect in India.
All right, Make in India has become Protect in India. I'm going to take it across to Yogendra Yadav. And Mr. Yadav, will you concede that as far as the rural sector is concerned, it really is a case of der aaye, durust aaye? I understand the obsession with MSP revisions. Some part of that has happened. But even on structural reforms like the Operation Green, or for that matter, the move to enable tenant farmers to get access credit, does this get your thumbs up?
Supriya, I'm actually amazed by ability of words, especially spoken in the budget, to simply deceive so much of our media, especially our English-speaking media, when it comes to agriculture in rural areas. If I were to do something like this to stock market, if I were to say, oh, my shareholders, I love you, you are the makers of this country, and so on, someone would say, thank you very much, but what are you giving me? What are the numbers? Give me hard numbers. Why don't we ask the same question for agriculture? If we ask a simple question, has the overall allocation for agriculture increased as a share of budget? The simple answer is no. Actually, it's gone down by 0.02%, basically stagnant. Has the overall allocation for disaster management, disaster relief gone up, especially in view of the very serious warning given by the economic survey? The answer is no. Actually, it's gone down. With so much talk about price protection for farmers, what has happened to price stabilization fund? What happened to market intervention scheme? The answer is their allocation has actually gone down compared to last year. Irrigation has gone up, yes, but has it gone up in the quantum that was required to handle the kind of challenge proposed by economic survey? The answer is no. Has any kind of loan waivers, loan restructuring, I should say, been announced for farmers? No, not at all. So what are we left with? I mean, I should say there are 2 or 3 tiny things that I do like about the agriculture part. Giving tax concession to FPOs is a good idea. For the first time, we have some serious money being given to animal husbandry and fisheries, which I think is a good idea. And upgrading of Gramin Mandis is in the long run something which can be used potentially in an interesting way. But what is that big thing? Where is that agricultural push? That leaves us with one big announcement. MSP as cost plus 50%. And everyone's been asking me, isn't this what you've been asking all these years? My answer is, actually this is a dodge. Unfortunately, today happens to be a day when this long-standing demand of farmers' movement has finally been buried and killed. And the device is very simple. The Swaminathan Commission had recommended cost plus 50% as the formula for prices for agriculture, but they had very clearly said cost means C2, which is a comprehensive cost. Mr. Arun Jaitley, having realized that he cannot fulfill that promise, what he does is that he shifts the goalpost. He changes the cost from C2 to something which is called A2 plus FL, which is a very limited partial cost. That doesn't look nice. This kind of sleight of hand in a budget doesn't look nice. So I'm afraid I really want to feel that it's an election budget. I want to believe it's given something to agriculture. But give me the numbers. Give me something to cheer about. Not just words. Please give me allocations. Please give me something hard to cheer about.
Yogendra Yadav, because there was such an overwhelming thrust in the rural sector, we thought it's only fair we let you take the first shot at the government. And Jayant Sinha, I'm going to let you counter Yogendra Yadav there. And the point that he's making, that you've shifted the goalpost to make it appear as if the government is meeting its election promise of giving the farmer cost plus 50%. One will have to wonder if, you know, a farm loan waiver is a route one the government should have gone down with. So I'm glad the government hasn't done that. But on MSP, you know, your reaction to the point made by Yogendra Yadav, and also on the fact that he's saying you haven't increased allocation to agriculture, and yet you're making it appear as if it's a budget with an overwhelming focus on the farmer. Jayant Sinha.
Well, my distinguished colleague Yogendra ji starts off by saying that in the budget we've tried to deceive with words, and then proceeds to do exactly that himself. He is of course being very deceptive in the statements that he's making, because he's saying that just because there are not certain allocations, that means that there is no follow through. Of course, he's wrong on both counts. The first, because there are significant allocations, and particularly when it comes to rural infrastructure, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, for horticulture, for fisheries, for dairying, where we've already announced an 11,000 crore dairying infrastructure fund, and on and on and on. So if you go through and you look at the allocations for all of the money that's going into the rural economy, for rural infrastructure, for agricultural markets, for Fasal Bima Yojana, you'll find that the allocations are extraordinary. First. Second, it's not necessary that policy innovation is accomplished only through spending. For example, Udan, which everybody agrees is a very successful program, is something that has just cost us 235 crores so far. And we've just done that because we've used market forces to our advantage, and we've designed a scheme where the incentives are aligned and the incentives are compatible with what needs to happen. Similarly, as far as agriculture is concerned, food processing, again, there we are working on incentives. We are creating the opportunity for market forces to be unleashed, and for an entire supply chain to get built there. Logistics is going to be a very big thing that's going to drive the agricultural supply chain. That's being promoted in a very, very effective way. And then when we come to the Swaminathan committee report, the Honorable Finance Minister was crystal clear. He wasn't being deceptive in the least bit when it came to words, because he said, we are going to accept the Swaminathan committee report. Now, I myself am not an expert in agricultural economics. I have not read the report in detail, but I have to believe that Dr. Swaminathan, who is in fact an agricultural expert, must have gone through and laid out in a clear-cut way which is the best way to make the MSP work. And in addition to that, and I'll close with this, there are a number of states that are experimenting with various different pricing schemes. It's been done in Haryana, it's been done in Madhya Pradesh. We have a lot to learn from with the different experiments that are underway. And this is a program, because as everybody knows, agriculture is a state subject, that we have to do with the states. We have to use their funds in some cases. We have to bring in policy innovation, and we have to find a way to make this work. That's what we're committed to doing. That's what we're going to deliver on. And our track record in implementation and delivery is the best that any government has ever achieved.
All right, let's keep the political debate apart, but ask you.
Can I come in for a minute?
Yes, Mr. Yadav, just give me a minute. Let me just get Congress on board, and then I'll come to you. Doctor, all right, go ahead. Make a really quick point, because I do want to go across Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Go ahead, Mr. Yadav.
If I'm wrong on allocations, and I concede the point Jayant makes, that on some things it has gone up. Of course, I myself mentioned it has. Overall allocation for agriculture, has it gone up? if this is the big push to agriculture, has all the overall allocation for agriculture as proportion of your budget gone up? This question cannot be answered in English. It has to be answered with numbers. And the numbers say, no, it's gone down. And I'm sorry, you're actually wrong. Swaminathan Commission clearly states C2 as the formula of comprehensive cost. And what Mr. Arun Jaitley is trying to do is A2FL. I can come and explain all these details, but I'm afraid Mr. Jaitley is not following the Swaminathan formula, and that's black and white. There is no room for interpretation here.
Talking about speaking in English and comprehending English as well, let me just take it across to Dr. Shashi Tharoor, all pun intended there. You know, just to leave the politics aside for a moment, do you believe at least the government has attempted to blunt the criticism of having ignored the agrarian crisis so far? I mean, this isn't a budget of a suit boot ki sarkar, Dr. Tharoor, and let's face it, they've perhaps read the signals from Gujarat and acted upon those.
Well, not entirely. I mean, first of all, as far as the agricultural stuff is concerned, every single person in this country who said anything in the pre-budget phase was saying that they will pay attention to agriculture now. In fact, the only reproach one can make is why so late in the day? It's been 4 years into their government, and they've finally woken up to the terrible agrarian distress that has created, unfortunately, mounting numbers of farmer suicides every year, and a tripling in the level of farmer agitations and riots that have been caused essentially because of the government's neglect. So over the last 2 or 3 years, the rural areas have suffered so much that it became indispensable to do something, and every single pre-budget analysis, without exception, including mine, said this is something they're going to be focusing on. But the question that we worry about, we talk about MSP, I agree with everything Yogendra Yadav said, but I'll add one more point. According to the figures I've seen, the MSP, even if it works and even if it's paid, will only benefit 6% of our farmers. The fact is that it only basically deals with the Kharif crop. It doesn't deal with those who are involved in the Rabi crop. And in terms of the numbers, Yogendra has already made very clear that it falls somewhere short of what had been earlier recommended. The other big ticket item in this budget, in fact, the only other big ticket item, is the National Health Protection Scheme. But unfortunately, that turns out to be a colossal jumla, because it is actually a wonderful objective, conceptually very necessary. We all know how the poor in our country have their lives destroyed when the breadwinner falls ill, and they have to give up their home, their income. They often sell their land or whatever they've got just to cure the person who may not in the end survive. So it's a family destroying thing to have an illness, and the idea that we must have a comprehensive health insurance scheme is absolutely necessary. We had a modest version of it in the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana in 2008. Mr. Jaitley himself announced a health protection scheme in his budget in 2016. So to some degree he's guilty of recycling, but I admire the ambition and I admire the need for the scheme. What I don't admire is the complete disconnection between the scheme that's been announced and any prospect of funding it. The National Health Mission budget has actually been reduced in this budget. There simply isn't the money to pay the premiums to cover 50 crore people, as Mr. Jaitley's speech said he would be doing, and that too to cover them to the tune of 5 lakhs of insurance. A 5 lakh insurance policy will cost you at least 5,000 rupees in premiums anywhere. Where's that money coming from? Multiply those 5,000 rupees premium by the 100 million families that the government claims it will cover. They do not have anything approaching that money in their budget. So is it one more case of speeches and slogans that this government specializes in without any indication of how in practice this will be funded? That certainly seems to be the case.
Fair enough. Jayant Sinha, let's leave Jumlanomics aside for a moment. But, you know, I want you to react to the point made by Dr. Tharoor. But just before this, we had Kiran Mazumdar Shah join us in the program, and she herself made the point that she believes allocations are not enough for this, for this ambitious program. She believes that the minimum one would look at about 10,000 crores at least for the government to be able to execute such a massive program. Where is the money going to come from?
The answer to that is very simple, which is that as this program gets going, more funds will be made available. I'm just coming from a meeting of the BJP Parliamentary Party. The Honorable Prime Minister was there, the Honorable Finance Minister was there. We had a lengthy discussion about outlays for these and other programs. And of course, Dr. Tharoor has been in government. He knows that even spending 2,000 crores on a new program is not that simple. You have to gear up the government machinery. That takes time, and once the government machinery starts to move, that's when the money can actually get spent. So right now we have made a token allocation for the program. We have to get the program fully implemented on the ground. We have to establish a whole host of things. Number one, exactly how eligibility will be defined, how will people be identified, which hospitals will be in the network and not in the network, what will be the diagnostic codes, what will be the payment for each of those diagnostic codes. There's a whole series of standards and protocols that have to be established. There's been a lot of work that's been happening, because I myself worked on an earlier version on this when we were thinking about increasing RSPY to 1 lakh, and that was in 2016. We have been working on it ever since then, and it's now come to the point where the money can get spent, that the healthcare delivery will begin to get started. But even as we do all of that, it will be difficult for us to spend the allocation that we have right now. But if we spend and we require more, those allocations can keep going up. Having been in the Ministry of Finance, I can tell you there is a fair degree of flexibility. We have the supplementals. If we need the money and we need to spend it, because this is a signature program of the government, I can assure Yogender ji, I can assure Dr. Tharoor, this will be done. This is a signature program. So please make no mistake, have no doubts, this program will be fully funded to the extent that delivery is happening. And of course, we are very prudent and we are very conservative in the way that we spend. We want to make sure the money is reaching the beneficiary. And when it comes to implementation and delivery, whether it is the Ujjwala Yojana, whether it is the Swabhagya Yojana, whether it is the Swasthya Bima Yojana, in every one of these particular cases, you will see we have set ambitious targets. We've achieved those ambitious targets because of efficient delivery. So please do not worry about delivery and funding. We will make that happen. Now, I want to come back to something.
Just one second, Mr. Sinha. Mr. Sinha.
He said,
I really will have to chip in on this, if I may, please. I have a lot of respect for my good friend.
And it's if you look at, I would commend Shri Yogender ji to look at the budget and see where we've outlined how much money we are putting into agriculture.
We are not going back to agriculture right now.
Do not worry about allocations. Okay. The math is there.
Okay, we are not going to go back to agriculture.
Let me respond to Jayant on principle.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Tharoor.
Please. No, my point very simply, Supriya, is this. Two things Jan said. Number one, we will find the money when we need it. That doesn't work, because if you want to insure 500 million people from day one, because they each have to be covered since any of them could fall sick at any time, you cannot do it in phases. You have to pay your premiums up front to the insurance companies, and you simply haven't a lot of the money to do so. So in effect, either you cover them out of taxpayers' money to be raised in future, or you cover them out of insurance premiums with insurance companies, and either way you haven't got the money in the budget. Second point, when Jayan talks about implementation, I point to the Fasal Bima Yojana, which is a classic case where the only people who gained from the scheme were the insurance companies. They got a windfall. But there's story after story of how crop failure has not been adequately compensated for suffering farmers. So if your objective of creating policy is to shore up your insurance industry, great. But if you're talking about actually helping the poorest of the poor in our society, this government's track record has been extremely disappointing, and it's something we all have to learn a lesson from, that there have to be ways in which we can ensure that benefits directly reach the intended beneficiaries, because the record does not suggest that that has been happening.
So this is the downside of having a panel with such wonderful debaters and politicians, that they'll just hijack the discussion, and poor Swami is not going to get a word in. So Swami, this is coming your way, and let's shift focused and talk about private investment. For 6 years, successive governments, and whether it's UPA or NDA, failed to kickstart private investment. In the second quarter of this fiscal, we saw an investment rate of 28.91% of GDP. Industrial GVA has declined from 9.8% in FY16 to 6.8% in 17. Do you see enough in the budget that will kickstart the investment cycle, Swami?
The budget by itself cannot do it. I've said repeatedly again and again, what really happened was earlier on, there was a large amount of export demand as well as domestic demand. Those two together gave you a very high scope for investing. Exports collapsed after 2013-14, barely recovering now. With the world boom, if they recover, that is going to do more to encourage investment than anything that there is in the budget. But what the budget does do is a highly regrettable thing called return to the income import substitution model of Nehru and Indira Gandhi. I mean, after all these years, you say that we are going to compete with the other Southeast Asian countries, we are going to reduce our import tariffs to that level, and we are now going to reduce our corporate tax rate to that particular level. Having done that, you have now increased your, not just increased from 10%, which was supposed to be the kind of earlier ceiling, many are 15, 20, 30, in some cases 50%. Some fruit juices, 50%. What is the value addition in squeezing a orange? You need a 50% to protect against that. I mean, you know, there's a lack of proportion in the whole thing. I understand that the job creation has not been very good. I understand some desperation on the part of Modi. But you do not solve this problem by going down the protectionist route. I don't know whether you heard Arvind Panagadi, our former head of Niti Aayog. Yeah. He has lashed out against this particular thing, and quite rightly so, saying this is a failed route of yesteryear. Why are you returning to it? This is not the way to improve investment and jobs.
Indeed, and it's not just him who's lashed out. In fact, I think the principal opposition, the Congress party, Mr. Chidambaram, in his briefing very early in the evening, did say that this is undoing what Prime Minister Modi talked about in Davos, which was embracing globalization. He's going the protectionist way when he did share a lesson or two on benefits of globalization. Jensen, I want you to come in and counter that point. I mean, what explains the fact that we are talking about higher imports? This is obviously a protectionist thing to do. Are we going to embrace the anti-globalization brigade now?
Let me quickly answer 2 points that Dr. Tharoor made, and then I'll come back to the import substitution thing. Number one, as far as Fasal Bima Yojana is concerned, over 5 crore farmers are protected. It's been working really well. And number two, when it comes to implementation, if you look at program after program that we've done, I think what we've delivered to people in rural areas, whether it's toilets, whether it's gas cylinders, whether it's electricity, whether it's bank accounts, I think our implementation record is vastly superior to any government that has come before us. And so I think, you know, you will have to just accept the facts, Dr. Tharoor, and recognize facts for what they are. Now, coming to the import substitution issue, Supriya, you have to understand that there is an important national security aspect to it as well, which is that a lot of electronic goods that we were getting obviously are coming from a country that we would like to reduce our import dependence from. And it's very important when it comes to electronics manufacturing, mobile phones, TVs, computers, that we improve and strengthen our manufacturing right here in India, not just because of jobs, but of course that's important, but also because ultimately electronics and electronics manufacturing are the heart of an economy of the future, and we really need to build our capability as far as that is concerned. So there is a national security side to it that is also important. And with that country that I'm speaking about, if you look at our balance of payments, that's seriously out of whack right now. Now, coming to the higher import duties when it comes to food processing, well, that's one of the reasons why we are trying to strengthen the situation of our farmers, because we are getting a lot of food items that are actually being imported. So we need to provide somewhat of an opportunity for our food processing industry to come up, to be able to make the investments necessary rather than importing from outside of the country. And therefore, you know, with the classic infant industry argument, it does make some sense for certain industries to get a certain amount of protection up front. And by the way, the duties that we brought in as far as phones are concerned have enabled us now to get to a point where some 40 or 50% of our phones are being manufactured in India, and that is vitally important.
Okay. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, come in on that quick rebuttal to the point made there by Jansen, and the larger point that, you know, the point that Swami made, that it's unfair to expect a budget to kickstart the investment cycle. I mean, what levers does a government really have? You know, it increased public expenditure, hoping to crowd in private investment over the last few years. That really didn't happen. And even this budget, there's been a sort of an affordable housing push, a rural roads push. So what more could the government really have done to kickstart private investment?
Okay, well, coming back to Jan's point, I think facts are facts and the facts are available for everyone to examine. I'm really sorry to say that, in fact, rural distress is staring us in the face. We've really had 3 times the number of agrarian riots and protests on the Modi government's watch, so I don't think he can say that all the various rural schemes have been working well. And as for bank accounts, well, unfortunately, many of them were empty until demonetization allowed some laundering to take place through these accounts. And finally, as far as the kinds of track record that Jayant is pointing to, we can certainly debate facts back and forth, but I don't think at the moment that there is an incontrovertible evidence at all that the objectives of government policy have been seen as fulfilled by the beneficiaries. Even the Ujjwala, which was praised again by the finance minister today, my understanding is that a majority of beneficiaries have not taken a second connection, a second cylinder, which suggests there's something wrong in their perception of the way in which the scheme is working. But be that as it may, Jayant and I can go back and forth with mutual respect and at the same time fundamental differences about what's the effective thing to do. But turning around to your question, I think both Swami, in the point he made, and Yogendra earlier, have pointed out to a couple of the challenges facing the government today, and it's partly the government's own fault. They had 4 years, we believe in some ways, or 3.5 years, which have essentially been a wasted opportunity. The extraordinary windfall of low international oil prices, which could have given them a headwind to actually transform many things, was simply mopped up by actually increasing taxes on the long-suffering Indian public, and no lasting benefit therefore accrued from that, other than some progress towards cutting the fiscal deficit, which unfortunately has been undone by the very overt missing of the declared fiscal target, which is supposed to be 3.2% of the fiscal deficit this year and 3% next year. We're coming up at 3.5 and 3.3, and I'm sure the very Moody's people whose congratulations to India were celebrated so overtly by this government are unlikely to look so happily at those numbers when they read them today. So I don't want to be a complete naysayer. I think there are some good things here, and certainly if everything the finance minister mentioned is actually effectively implemented, we should see some good results. But the other aspect, apart from allocations, which I've already made a big fuss about, the other aspect has always been implementation. We're always better at intention than at implementation, and I am really not confident that many of these things are actually going to happen. Certainly they're not going to happen within the time frame available to this government.
Not being an out-and-out noiser, and I think that's important in our political system. There has to be consensus on things that are important. Yes, Mr. Yadav, please come in with your thoughts. I know you wanted to make a point on private investment and what will kickstart it. Please go ahead.
Not so much on that, actually, because Jayant brought in the question of Fasal Bima Yojana. I wanted to say something there, not because I wish to go to agriculture, but just as an instance of what this government considers its achievement. As Shashi had pointed out earlier, this scheme has cost all the governments. Put together, the premium is about 22,000 crore rupees. The farmers have been given about 10,000, so the companies have made a profit of about 12,000 crore rupees. Now, someone can say, rightly so, that insurance companies need not lose every year. They would make profit one year, they would lose another year. So I looked closely at the case of Tamil Nadu and at the case of Bihar, because these are two states which faced atrocious weather. Tamil Nadu had one of the worst droughts of the last 140 years. So clearly that's where the Fasal Bima Yojana should have yielded something to the farmers. Yes, it yielded more than the premium they had paid, but the overall payment is only 20% of the sum assured in a state which faced the worst drought of the last 140 years. Do you call it a success? This is one, I mean, I've been traveling all over the country, been speaking to people in rural areas, and Fasal Bima Yojana is one of the things I ask about. This is the one Yojana in the world, one insurance, I don't know of many, where the insuree doesn't know that he or she has been insured. They are not given one chit of paper to say, you've been insured, this is the amount you've been taken from you, and this is the one which is due to you should you face any of these extremities. They don't know about it. Is that a success? I think this illustrates 2 or 3 things. One, inability of this government to, and many governments in India, I should not say this is the only exception, but this more than others, to replace a lot of bombastic PR with any factual evaluation of hardcore outcomes. Two, in the case of this budget, no matching of where the mouth is and where the money is. I find this in education, for example. Once again, so much of who are this time about education. The overall allocation for education has actually gone up only by about 9% or so, less than the overall budget. And everyone says this has focus on education. Where is the focus? And the third disturbing thing I find in this government is its tendency to pass on so many targets to a time period where its tenure would be over. So farmers would get double income when? 2022. Great initiative on research in education. But that will go for 4 years. What's the additional allocation this year? About 10 crores additional or 30 crores additional. These are things which should worry anyone who looks at economy and looks at a government which is responsible. My own sense is that this government had done itself in so much, partly because of mishandling of via demonetization, partly because it simply ate up all the reserves that came from oil, that by the time it came to the election year, it had no room available for any maneuvering, and therefore we find a budget which tries to be populist, is not populist because actually it doesn't reach to those people. So it's neither here nor there.
Right. I don't know if we can call it responsibly populist, but I think we'll have to take a really quick breather on that one. It's been a really fascinating discussion. We've discussed the flagship of healthcare, we've discussed the MSP, the agrarian mess, the private cycle. But we're going to come back and put the spotlight on middle class. Has the middle class in India been taken for granted? We're going to talk about political calculations, and we are going to talk about divestment. Why is the government shying away on talking about big ticket privatization? Coming back in a moment with this fascinating panel. Do keep it with ET Now.
Back with ET Now. This is Budget Debate, the most definitive debate on Budget 2018 with Swaminathan Iyer, Jayant Sinha, Shashi Tharoor and Yogendra Yadav. Jayant Sinha, a simple question. Why has the government ignored the middle class? A standard deduction of 40,000 rupees is about as what the middle class has got out of Budget 2018. I understand the political compulsions to make it a rural-focused budget, even though Yogendra disagrees on that very premise. But leave that aside, nothing material for the middle class.
No, of course, that is not a correct way of saying it, Sandeep. The reality is that over the last few years, when it comes to tax rates, we have provided the middle class much relief. Obviously, the slab itself has gone from 2 to 2.5 lakhs. We've increased the mortgage interest tax deduction. We have increased the deduction for savings, for investments. We have in this budget, of course, provided the standard deduction. So there are a number of things that we have done as far as taxes are concerned. If you look at what we've done for senior citizens, of course, they are getting no tax reduction on their interest. We've provided a scheme in which they're getting an assured return of 8%. We provided them a medical exemption allowance. So for senior citizens, I think it's a very attractive package. But that's the tax side of the ledger. You also have to look at the benefits that we are providing the middle class. And first and foremost, the most important benefit that the middle class is getting is lower inflation. During Dr. Tharoor's time, when they were in government, inflation was running at 9 or 10%. During our time, inflation is running at 3 or 4%. Real interest rates are 2 or 3%, which means people's savings and investments are going up. The stock market has gone up from 22,000 to 36,000. The middle class has benefited greatly in that because the Provident Fund has been investing in the stock market, NPS has been investing in the stock market. Their savings are going up. And then if you look at infrastructure, you look at roads, you look at railways, you look at airports, you look at electricity, all of those different things have been dramatically improved Aviation, of course, is a great example of how much better the flying experience is right now. All of that is going directly to the middle class and benefiting the middle class. I'd like to remind you that during the UPA time, there was this great blackout that we had in India because neither the distribution system, the grid, nor the power supply was adequate to meet the middle class needs. Do we ever hear of any of those things today? No. We've dealt with those issues, and those are very relevant and germane issues for the middle class. And then finally, for the middle class, I will also say that if you look at employment generation, 60 to 70 lakh people joining the EPFO, job opportunities in many new sectors of the economy, that for the middle class is extremely important. Education is important for the middle class, and we're delivering on that side of the ledger as well. So you have to look at it in its totality, what is done for taxes, and then what is done as far as benefits are concerned. And in sum, it is a very attractive package, a very attractive quality of life, ease of living that we're delivering for the middle class.
I'm going to touch upon that statistical warfare as far as jobs are concerned in just a moment from now, but I will take it across to Swami. And Swami, while Mr. Sinha wants to obviously defend that there's plenty that has been done for the middle class, it hasn't been ignored. Do you believe in some sense this is a political calculation here? The BJP obviously believes that the urban middle class is a loyal vote bank and doesn't need to be appeased. And so nothing apparent has been done in Budget 2018.
No, I would say that if Mr. Modi has said at Davos that we are going to globalize, he's wrong. But at Davos, he also said we are going to be non-populist and not freebie. And to that extent, the budget has delivered. So in other words, I mean, the kind of question you're asking suggests that every election budget should be full of freebies. And Mr. Modi has already said, no, I do not think that is the way to run the country. So I would say kudos to Mr. Jaitley on following up on that and saying, I cannot be in the position of trying to woo every single vote bank with freebies every single budget. This is not the way you run a country. This is not the way you run a system. You say, is Mr. Modi taking the middle class for granted? Actually, he can't. There is a huge problem of the educated unemployed. So there are a significant chunk of those guys who are right now not automatically in the Modi camp. You've seen Hardik Patel, you've seen what happened in Gujarat, that there are a large number of educated fellows, part of that middle class, who are rebelling against the current system. So Modi cannot take the middle class for granted. But all those problems cannot be solved by giving a freebie or two to the middle class on income tax. That is not the way to do it. In fact, if you see what's happened in terms of, some of the moves was, that we will pay the share of the provident fund to improve employment. We will allow contract labor to increase the amount of, some of those things may actually do more for the middle class than some little fudging around with the income tax rate.
Important point. So you believe that some of those announcements could help create more jobs and could do more for the middle class. Hopefully that will come through. But we've got a lot of ground to cover and little time left on the show. So Dr. Shashi Tharoor, another point that we at ET Now like to sort of focus a lot on is disinvestment, privatization. And do you share a disappointment in the government's rather conservative divestment target? I mean, no talk of big ticket privatization. It clearly doesn't appear like the government wants to put its political capital behind privatization. I'm told the proceeds of Air India sale have also not been factored in the divestment proceeds for this financial year. Do you share our disappointment there?
Absolutely. In fact, privatization is a misnomer because whatever divestment or disinvestment has taken place has actually been one government entity buying the shares of another government entity. There hasn't really been a whole lot of serious privatization. And, the only example Mr. Jaitley was prepared to mention in his speech was Hindustan Petroleum being bought up by ONGC, which is really one hand of the government taking care of another hand of the government. I'm not sure this qualifies in any meaningful sense as privatization. But I'd like to go back to Swami's point about the middle class, because I think he made a glancing reference to something that is fundamental to the future of this country. According to Niti Aayog figures, something like 20% of our educated population is unemployed. I mean, we talk about national unemployment figures of 3.5%. 20% educated unemployed. It's a terrifying figure. And then you've got the World Bank report of last year, which says that 30.8% of India's population aged between 15 and 29 are not in education, not in employment, and not in training. Now, that's the age, 15 to 29, when you should be doing either studies or work. And if our population, 1/3 of our population, is not doing any of those things, There's a major crisis staring us in the face. Now, you may remember that in 2014, one of Mr. Modi's strongest messages was actually precisely this, that as far as our people are concerned, our young people are concerned, that he would give them jobs, that he would get them employed, that he would enhance investment in this country that makes it possible for these things to happen. In practice over the last 4 years, jobs have not been generated, and unfortunately we don't see enough encouragement for investment, which is why investment is at a record low in the last few years. This is the real problem, and I think it's all very well for us to applaud Mr. Modi for not giving freebies, but what is he giving to the educated unemployed of our country? Where are the jobs for the young coming from, and what steps can we take in order to pull the longer term future of our country out of the morass in which it finds itself now?
Fair point indeed. And Jensen, I'll get you to react to that point as well, and also take a question on Air India very quickly then. You know, can we afford to let a subject like jobs be mired in the statistical controversy, whether it's the EPFO data that we should go by or some other data which will prove that jobs have been created? And is that also a case of, you know, shifting a goalpost, changing a statistic? And, you know, as the Minister of State for Civil Aviation, is it only fair that you take the question about Air India privatization? Your government has been slow to espouse and embrace divestment, but now that you have, why are you shying away from big ticket privatization like Air India? Why is it not a part of the proceeds? Why has it not been budgeted for?
So Supriya, I'll answer the Air India question first, and then I'll come to the employment matter. As far as Air India is concerned, and again, Dr. Tharoor, facts are facts. The company that has been mentioned in the budget as in these are the exact words, and I quote, strategic privatization, is in fact Air India. So we have been very clear that we are going to take Air India, which is a landmark transaction, and we're going to make it happen this calendar year. Now, the reason why it's probably not included in the disinvestment proceeds is because it's very difficult to figure out exactly what the bidding for Air India will come out to be in terms of actual bids that will be tendered for that. It depends a lot on the kind of debt that we place in the entity that will be offered up for sale, and those are things that are still being worked out right now. But the process is underway. The government is committed to the privatization of Air India. These words are used in the budget speech themselves, and as I said, this will be a landmark transaction, the single largest privatization ever done in India. As I've said, the roadmap has been clearly defined. We will have a winning bidder by the end of June, and we will do the legal closing by the end of this calendar year. So that is a landmark transaction, and of course there are a number of other privatizations that are also underway. For example, Pawan Hans, which in fact will happen prior to Air India because it started before Air India. That company, which is a helicopter operator also within the Ministry of Civil Aviation, will also be privatized, and it will be given to a company in the private sector. So we are moving forward on a methodical, deliberative way as far as privatization is concerned, and Air India, of course, is front and center on that. Now, let me come to the second question about employment. There again, the facts are in front of all of us, and there is a very, very well documented and very thoroughly researched study which has been done on the basis of the EPFO data, which is probably the best data that's available right now on employment, and that data is indicating that there are 60 to 70 lakh formal jobs a year being created. 60 to 70 lakhs formal jobs a year that are being created, and that's how fast the number of EPFO subscribers is growing. In addition to those formal jobs that are being created and are being captured in the EPFO database, we've also said that the Mudra Yojana, where 10 crore people have got more than 4 lakh crores in loans, are obviously also creating jobs. And Niti Aayog has been tasked, and they are in the process of doing so, to establish a comprehensive view of jobs, both in the formal sector as well as in the informal sector, to understand what is the nature of employment that people are getting, where is it coming from, is it coming from formal jobs, is it coming from entrepreneurship, is it coming from self-employment. We will get that holistic, complete picture once Niti Aayog has done that work. But what good studies are telling us is 60 to 70 lakhs
this
people
claim
getting
is
jobs
simply
in the formal sector a year, and in addition to that, maybe a few crore a year. Shashi, please don't speak when I'm speaking. Please don't interrupt. When you look at what is happening with Mudra, that is crores of people a year as well.
I just want to
think the
correct
job
that
picture
particular
is
point.
in fact far more robust than those who are vendors of words and who run around saying things like colossal jumla, don't understand what the facts are telling them. You can try and spin things along with words, but facts are facts.
Okay, Shashi, quick rebuttal. I need to go to Yogendra Yadav. Quick rebuttal from you, Shashi Tharoor.
No, just on the 60 to 70 lakh people, this is a figure that's been widely discredited simply because it seems that we have about 66 lakh job seekers a year. There's no way that all 66, 70 of them got jobs this year. The fact is that there was a circular issue that allowed a number of people already working who had not been signed up for the EPFO to sign up this year. And as a result, these numbers were a reflection of people who had actually been employed over several preceding years. This has been published. It's not something that can now be contested. The truth is that the basic claim that we are creating 70 lakh jobs a year is simply discredited by that mere fact. We haven't, in fact, government own figures till this Ghosh and Ghosh study, the government's own figures spoke of a much more modest number. So we can't suddenly transform overnight and claim to have created jobs we haven't created. We have enrolled more people in the EPFO. That is not the same thing as creating jobs. Most of them were working and had been employed over several previous years.
Jobs is a debate in itself, and one will have to wait and see what was the EPFO enrollment during the time of the UPA government, and then you can do a like-to-like comparison. But Shashi and Jayant Sinha, you have to allow me to get in a word from Yogendra Yadav, who's been waiting patiently, and let's address the politics of it. Closing comments from my panelists. Yogendra Yadav, do you believe this budget makes an attempt to sort of completely break this whole Sood Boot Ki Sarkar image? I mean, this is a budget that imposes a long-term capital gains tax on equities, that cuts corporate tax only for small and medium enterprises, not for large corporates. Will you concede that the government has walked the extra distance? Some would say, much to the disappointment of the pink press, but would you concede that the government has walked the extra distance to at least hit and close this, this debate on Sood Boot Ki Sarkar? Because we live in times when wearing a Burberry jacket by a politician becomes a big political controversy.
First, a quick word on the employment debate, Vinay, before I come back to your question. I think 60, 70 new organized sector jobs a year. Do we realize what we are talking about? In 4 years, we would have created about 3 crore new jobs. In this country, the overall organized sector has about, 4 crore jobs. So either people like me are so stodgy, blind, anti-Modi that we can't see that within the last 3 years, the last 3-4 years, the country has doubled its organized sector jobs, or there's something dodgy here. I would personally defer to Swami's wisdom on this, but this looked odd to me that a government would not trust its own Labour Bureau report, would not go by the ILO data, but would go by one paper based on a data set which is not yet in the public domain. It looks strange to me. Though coming back to your question, of course the government is making that effort. Of course they are worried about Sood Boot Ki Sarkar. Of course they want to go an extra mile to let it to contradict that. The question is whether they have actually done so, whether it is effective, whether it is real. And I really fear the governments now see, this happens with many governments these days, but particularly with this one, I think they really think that perception is more important than performance, that managing impressions and images is all that there is to managing public opinion. Therefore, you should not appear to be Sood Boot Ki Sarkar. You should devote a lot of words and verbiage and impression and put a lot of pressure on media and create all this hype. You don't really need to do much about it. Once you've done it, that's all right. And closer to election, there's always the Hindu-Muslim thing that can be played up. That is what worries me. Yes, in any democracy, you want the government to come closer to the people. Yes, you expect the government not to cater only to the middle class. And I'm afraid I completely disagree with the point that was being made, because in this country, strangely, people who live on 91st percentile and above choose to call themselves middle class for reasons that I've never understood. and they want more and more, and they have a sense of strange entitlement, which has always surprised me.
Sure.
So yes, the government should come closer to the people, and if election and democracy makes them do so, I would only welcome it. But has it really done so? That remains a question at the end of the day.
But talking about blunting that narrative, you really explained beautifully that, and I can't agree more with you on a middle class that forever wants all the time and forever wants more. But talking about the narrative of this Soot Boot Ki Sarkar and talking about what our country is witnessing, a Burberry jacket being worn, and then being explained that this wasn't mine, I had actually borrowed it. We live in very interesting times. Jayant Sinha, my question to you really is, how much more left of center is your government going to attempt to be? You guys were supposed to be the free market thinkers. You guys were supposed to be the free market economists. And look at what has happened. You are perhaps as left of center as the UPA was.
So, Supriya, that is entirely wrong. It is our government that has said that, government has no business being in business. We are the ones that are privatizing Air India. We are the ones that have deregulated and opened up market after market. We are the ones that have bought in the bankruptcy code and made bidding for natural resources. We've cut back on the black economy. We've raised tax compliance. So I don't think anybody can accuse us of being a left of center government. We are a very traditional right of center government in terms of our economic policies, in terms of how we have unleashed the business sectors, how we've unleashed the private sector, and that's why FDI is going up. It's gone up from 36 billion to 60 billion. But I want to address one thing that Yogendra ji was saying. Unlike him, this is not my full-time job. My full-time job is actually serving the people. I'm not a studio gladiator that spins my words all days long. We have to go out and face the people as elected representatives. I have a very large constituency, as does Dr. Tharoor. If we don't deliver for the people, if we don't perform, if we don't win elections day in and day out, we will be out the door very, very quickly. So there is no question of doing this and focusing on perception. We have to deliver on the ground. If the toilets are not getting built, if the roads are not getting built, if the toilets are not clean in airports, if people are not getting their bank accounts when they want it, I get to hear about it immediately. I get hundreds of calls, I get thousands of comments on social media. So as far as accountability and performance and delivering on the ground is concerned, Yogendra ji can say what he wants. Again, as I said, he can wrap himself up in words. The reality is we are accountable and we have to deliver, and the government has been doing it, which is why we've been winning election after election after election, because we understand we have a prime minister who's been chief minister very successfully of a state where he has shown results on the ground. He knows exactly what is required to get administration to work and to make implementation happen, and that's what we have demonstrated.
Just one word.
Yeah, sure, Yogendra ji. Very, very quickly, 10 seconds. I need to get Swami's final word.
I must have said something very, very right and possibly harsh for Jayant to lose his logical mind and get into this somewhat avoidable rhetoric. As for being television gladiators, I would like Jayant
I'm being very logical, Yogendra ji. I'm just stating the facts.
And agriculture and villages that I've been doing for the last 2 years. Will happily do so, and we would realize how much of time who spends on television. Forget that. But I must defend Jayant Sinha against this very obnoxious charge of him being left. I think he's absolutely right. He is far from being left, not merely in the sense of not being wooden-headed about privatization, but also in the sense of not at all being careful on, not at all tilting towards social justice. He must not be accused of such things.
He must not be accused of such a thing. It doesn't matter whether you're left or right, just get the policies right. Swami, last word to you, which is at the end of the day, it's all about winnability, as Jayant Sinha rightly said. It's all about winnability. What does this budget do or not do to the winnability of Modi in 2019? Does it matter at all? Rahul Gandhi has tweeted saying, thankfully, only one more year to go.
Yes, only one more year to go. I would say for Rahul Gandhi on the opposition benches, there are many, many years to go. The situation is not as happy as for him, as he seems to be unhappy about Modi. I do not believe a budget of this kind determines election outcomes. Every single government, when it comes to its final year, produces something called election budget, and yet anti-incumbency is rife. So the idea that a budget can solve an election, I mean, the two just do not go together. This particular budget has, as I said, positives and negatives. I'm glad they've not gone for the freebies. I'm very disappointed with the revival of protectionism as the solution of the creation of jobs. But we didn't discuss it, but I am impressed by their attempting to go for the labor reform by saying that, this contract labor can be now allowed in every single industry. That's a new measure which can result in additional investment and additional jobs. So as I said, this is a this is a mixed up budget. Frankly, it's mixed up in goods and bads, mixed up in ideology, mixed up in vision.
What would you rate on a scale of 10?
Because they've avoided the freebies, I said I will still give it on balance 6 out of 10.
So 6 out of 10 was Swami's rating when the budget speech ended at 12:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and he continues to stick by that. But what a fascinating discussion this really has been as far as Budget 2018 is concerned. And I can't thank my panel enough. Jayant Sinha, Shashi Tharoor, Yogendra Yadav and Swaminathan Iyer, thank you very, very much for joining us and putting Budget 2018 in perspective. The discussion and the debate can really go on because this is the last full year budget of the Modi government. There are many promises that were made, some that have been kept and some that the government has completely squandered the chance to walk the talk on.
Eventually, two things matter. How does the economy do this year? Because we all want the economy to grow well. We want all sectors to grow well. Agriculture, industry, services, all of them. And of course, what does it do to 2019? Who comes back to form the next government? Those are the only two factors that really matter at the end of the day. Thank you so much for being with us in this special edition of Budget Debate. Thank you, Jayant Sinha, Swaminathan Iyer, Shashi Tharoor and Yogendra Yadav. Up next are the 10 stories you need to know about Budget 2018. It's a special telecast of Top 10 at 10 right here on ET Now.